Hello once again. It is time for another edition of the Vandy program. And for the, I don't know, whatever numberth time.
Fourth?
It might be the fourth time.
Fourth time?
Fourth time. We're sitting down with a chap I'm proud to call a friend. Canadian Stephen Barrigar, who is the author of a newsletter called The Velcro Staircase, which we'll ask him to explain in a little bit. He's based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, which is north of the border, but south of a good chunk of the U.S. That old line about, the 49th.
South of the peninsula.
South of the peninsula, the 49th parallel thing or whatever. But
south of Minnesota.
South of Minnesota, but north of, upstate New York.
Yeah.
Something like that, yeah.
30 kilometers as the crow flies from Buffalo. Yeah.
There we go. And kilometers is always easier for us Americans to do because we don't have to subtract or multiply 32 or multiply by 9.
It makes a lot of sense. You hold on to that imperial, buddy.
Yeah, we do.
You hold on to it.
Hey, when it's 0, it's freezing. When it's 100, it's really hot. It's kind of, that's the way the Americans go. So speaking of all things U.S. and Canada, let's start with tariffs because we seem to be on this side of the border. We seem to be waiting, I guess, sort of, kind of, for the Supreme Court to say something about whether or not these tariffs are legal. And I'm not sure exactly how that's going to go, and if they are deemed to be illegal, how quickly they can be unwound. But you've told us before that it seems like there's a definite buy Canadian, stay out of the U.S., support the folks at home approach throughout the country. Explain a little bit more about how that's working out.
Sure, it's across all industries. One of the things that's fairly interesting we should realize about tariffs is right now, even in its current state with tariffs against Canada, the majority of goods that travel between the two countries are still under the CUSMA Agreement, somewhere around the 85% number. So the majority of products that travel between the U.S. and Canada are not under tariff. From the Canadian side, unfortunately, a couple of our larger industries do have tariffs against them. In the west part of the country, softwood lumber does have a tariff against it, and that's not part of CUSMA. And in Ontario, where I live, steel and aluminum, also a big part of Quebec's industry, those do have significant tariffs against them of approximately anywhere between 30 and 50%. So those parts of our industry do have tariffs against them. But for the most part, what we're seeing in Canada is we are seeing a lot of Canadian products that are really doing quite well because of maybe not an anti-American buying situation, but just because of these tariffs and supplemental tariffs put by the Canadian government against the Americans have made certain things more expensive. So they've made it easier to buy Canadian, which is what majority of people are doing.
Explain what CUSMA is.
CUSMA is the Canadian-United States-Mexico agreement. It's more or less the expansion of free trade, which two old guys like us will remember from the late 80s. When Mexico was brought into NAFTA in the early 90s. And then about 8 years ago, NAFTA was redesigned at the time the first Trump presidency. He wanted to have more oversee on what was included in that. So CUSMA was born, I want to say 2018. And so that had the Trump seal of approval then. And then, unfortunately, 7 years later, didn't have the same approval.
So what happens let's take something about, because we'll talk in the U.S. often, and it might be a little bit more acute, the issue of, let's say, housing shortages.
Sure.
In the country. So let's talk about what say the soft lumber, what the soft lumber tariff thing might have to do with expanding the housing stock in Canada, or is that just something that there's enough timber in Canada and it's really not an issue?
We don't import timber. We have more than enough woods here in Canada. So where it's affected Canada is and it more affects Americans, is the fact that with these new tariffs, softwood that is used for construction and those things, it now costs more for contractors and builders of homes in America to import this lumber, which you've been using for decades now, and then all of a sudden it now costs more money. So it doesn't affect homes in Canada so much, but it does affect homes in the United States.
What about, that's interesting, because I wouldn't think that we America would need Canadian lumber. I guess I would have assumed that there was more already.
You have lots of, you're right. You have lots of lumber, but our lumber is cheaper. We're able to sell you lumber at a cheaper rate. It's much like the gas, the petroleum that you get from Canada, from Alberta. We sell it to you sell to Americans at discounted rates. When all of a sudden you put tariffs on those goods, those discounted rates are nullified. So it comes out as a lose situation.
Gotcha. You mentioned Alberta. You and I talked, so let me tell the viewers that on Inauguration Day in the U.S. In 2025, as opposed to watching the speech, you and I just chatted while it was going on, and I'm sure you remember that. And one of the things that came up back then was, well, one of the things I think that at least caught me flat-footed was the fact that Trump would, in fact, go so whole hog on tariffs that I would say it played a role in Carney's election. But one of the other things that we talked about a year and change ago was the fact that there's some consternation in Alberta. There's always going to be an Alberta separatist thing going on. And it sounds like there's been some movement on that front, but it's still a long process, and it may not ever come to fruition anyway.
When you have a country as large as Canada geographically, it's funny when you have a city like New York City and people talk about, hey, our boroughs are not the same, right? If you live in the Bronx, it's different than living in Queens. It's certainly different than living in Staten Island. And that's, you're talking about a city. When you have a country the size of Canada, the people in the Maritimes in Eastern Canada have very little in common with people in Alberta, except that a lot of people in the Maritimes actually went out and worked in the... So finding common ground is difficult. One of the things that I can completely relate to is Western alienation. I think that my wife is from the prairies, growing up in central Canada, if you call it, which is really Eastern Canada, which is Ontario. You really do think you're at the center of the universe when it comes to Canada. And if all the decisions are being made in central Canada, or if you will, Eastern Canada, all of a sudden you have 4 to 5 million people in Alberta who feel like their opinions don't matter. And I can totally understand that. Now, the Alberta situation is actually very interesting in the fact that while there is some momentum for separatism or separating themselves from Canada, it is fairly small. And unfortunately, there's a bunch of different gaps. So there's no really clear line of sight of what the end goal would be. So if you ask one person, let's say out of 10 people, if you ask one person would say, "Oh, I'd love to join America," while another person would be, "Well, I want to be my own sovereign nation, but I want to keep my Canadian passport and I want to use Canadian currency." And then you have another one person that says, "I want to be my own country. I want to have my own military. I want to have my own tax situation," and that sort of thing. But then if you ask 7 people, the 7 people will be like, "Well, what are we talking about? We're part of Canada." So that's where we are. So we have 3 and 7 that are interested in becoming their own world, their own nation.
You mean 3 and 10?
Sorry, 3 and 10, yeah. 3 and 10 want to become their own sovereign nation, but they just don't understand what that sovereign nation will actually be. So once they understand that, then it becomes a little bit more of a clear situation. I completely understand why people are frustrated. Our elections start 8 o'clock in Halifax is 5 o'clock in Alberta and 4 o'clock in Vancouver. So all of a sudden, if you're watching CBC and the election is leaning towards the Liberals or the Conservatives, you haven't even finished your voting yet in Calgary or Victoria. And so there may be and then the next region over is Ontario, and if polls close at 9 o'clock in Ontario, yet it's still 7 o'clock in Alberta. In Edmonton, some would be like, "Well, the election's basically over." So I totally understand what their frustration. It would be frustrating for me as well. I live in a riding. So the way Canada works is you have a bunch of different ridings. I live in a riding of about approximately 120,000 people. So if I'm voting a certain way, my vote doesn't count as much as other ridings where there might be 50,000 people or 75,000 people. At 120,000 people in my riding, that's a lot of people. And one vote is a very, very small piece of that pie.
So the ridings aren't set up like the U.S. House of Representatives, where there's X number of them, and it's divided amongst the states, so that you've got, I think there's 435, so it's short of 700,000 or so, if my math is correct, per district. It's not set up the same way
it's set up in
Canada.
the same way that there are ridings, and each riding is based on should be based on population, and sometimes it's based on geography. So we have 343 ridings in Canada. So because in Ontario we have the most population, we do have the most ridings coming out of Ontario. Now, if you're living in Alberta and you are fourth in the province, fourth in the where the provinces are in population, yet you produce, one of our most important industries, and you make a lot of money, you could understand why all of a sudden, while you don't have as many people, because of your economic strength, your voice should count for a little bit more.
Okay. So I know that they're circulating a petition, but the petition has to get the petition is to have if memory serves, is to have a clear referendum, and the clear referendum would be stay or leave, were it to come to fruition. But you've got to get X number of signatures to get to that point. And then the Premier of Alberta has said you can put a petition, and if you get enough signatures, we can do a referendum.
So what has happened is that it used to be that you had to get a large number, approximately 600,000 signatures for it to become a referendum. The present Premier in Alberta, Danielle Smith, decreased that to, it's somewhere around 100,000 and change signatures on the petition for it to become part of something that they can vote on. The voting is important because it shows the power of the people. Unfortunately, at this stage, we're nowhere near a majority of people who want this. Also, there's no clear, per what I said earlier, there's no clear what they actually want. It would be great if all of a sudden we didn't have to pay any federal taxes, but we still kept our Canadian passports and we used Canadian money and we kept our Canadian pensions, and all of those things happen, but that's not realist. The other thing is, if it ever got to that stage where, let's say it's 51% actually vote that they would like a sovereign nation, then it goes to the courts, because unfortunately for Albertans who want to do that, if Alberta ceases to be part of Canada, all land rights revert back to the First Nations. And the First Nations agreement is with the Crown, which is the federal government. It's not with Alberta. And it was made with the Crown before Alberta was actually a province. So Alberta would, if you lived in Alberta, and once again, I'm not a lawyer, it's my understanding that if you live in Alberta and this happened, your land, your house would actually revert back to being First Nations land. And therefore, you would have to start all over again with the First Nations, and there are several of them in Alberta. So, plus the government would keep federal lands, which would be army bases and national parks, Banff, Jasper, all these wonderful things that are crown jewels of Alberta would still be Canadian properties. And depending on what happened, Albertans may need a passport to visit those places going forward. So it's a messy situation. I understand what Danielle Smith's doing. I don't like it, but I understand it. She's putting out the option, letting her part of her base know that I've listened to you. I want to hear your voice. I want to make sure that this is important to you. So let's hear it. But she is playing a little bit of a game. It's a little bit of a gamble that I think she's expecting, or maybe she's hoping, or maybe she's not. I don't know. That we hit at most 25% of people who want this to happen, and then it goes dormant again for another decade, and then it's someone else's problem, and we can kick it down the road, right? We haven't had a referendum in Quebec since '95, and while the Parti Québécois and the Bloc Québécois on the federal side still have many seats, no one has talked about referendums with any kind of validity since the debut of the first Bush album.
Yeah, but it's part of the reason behind that. And again, I'm your neophyte American, quasi Canada-phile, just interested in how this stuff works. But is part of the Premier's idea that she's I guess, so Quebec was able to get something out of the deal, even though they lost, right? I mean, it's...
Quebec's always had the same thing. Quebec has nothing has changed in Quebec. It's always been where I think Alberta is frustrated is that since Canada was Canada, Quebec has been its own independent thing, and they have had, I wouldn't say rights, but they have had rules that affect them differently than the other parts of Canada.
But after the referendum, then there were a bunch of court-related things that said that if a referendum were to successfully pass, the government has to have good faith negotiations with those who pass the referendum, correct? That's my understanding of the benefit of Quebec. For the way that I understand that the Quebec referendum actually benefits the Alberta separationists is that if they were to win, which, if I'm hearing you correctly, the odds probably are not very good, but if they were to win, they can have a good faith as long as it's a clear question, it's required of them and the Canadian government to negotiate in good faith. So I guess Yeah, I guess what I'm saying here is
that may be true, but all of a sudden, then it's a negotiation with Alberta, the Crown, and First Nations, right? So Alberta just and that's where I think a majority of people in this story don't quite get. It doesn't become a two-party discussion. It's a three-party discussion. That's not a discussion, it's a court battle between First Nations, the federal government, and the province of Alberta. And so it's not as easy as being one plus just Canada and the US. Sorry, not Canada and the US. Canada and Alberta acting in good faith. All of a sudden there's a third arm, which is a very important arm, which has all the legal standing that land is now theirs.
Okay, I think
as soon as Alberta does not become part of Canada, the treaties are therefore null and void. Therefore, all land goes back to First Nations. Now, that doesn't mean that a bunch of Albertans are like, "Hey, First Nations, here's $1 trillion. You can keep the land you work on, but we want..." That's not saying that doesn't happen.
Yeah,
but it's.
But there's so many steps to get to that point because you got to have the petitions to get the referendum. You got to have a date for the referendum. And then those who got the petitions, the referendum has to be clear, and then you have to get 51% of the residents to vote, or 50% plus one 50% to vote in its favor. Yeah.
And right now, it's anywhere between, people who want to leave is anywhere between 20 and 25%. And then there's probably another 10% that want Alberta to be its own place, but don't want to lose any of its Canadian benefits. Now, the funny thing about Alberta is that, it wasn't too long ago that Alberta talks about being a half province, but they've been a have-not province before. It is most recently as 30 years ago. So when they talk about spending money for other groups, other provinces, they once accepted money from other provinces. They were a have-not province. And all of their money, all of their GDP is based in making oil out of sand. That's it. That's their whole industry. So anyway, it's an interesting thing. I don't want to make light of this, but there are so many things that you have to do once you become your own country. I would assume that Alberta would have to have some sort of service thing for individuals that turn 18 to 25 would have to have a service agreement where they join the army, because they would have no army.
And how many? I mean, this is not a big province either, population-wise.
It's
like 4
just over
million?
5 million people.
Okay, so how many? What percentage of that is going to be 18 to 25-year-old males?
Well, I would assume it would be both males and females, because it would have to be. It
would almost have to be. And how do you take the young, mostly men, off of the oil, out of the oil fields?
And then the other question is, they're a landlocked province. So they would be a landlocked nation. And I ask you, David, what is the most successful landlocked nation?
It's either Lesotho or Andorra.
It's possibly Switzerland, maybe Austria.
Okay.
No joking aside, that's kind of where we are, right? So if you produce all this oil, you still need to have arrangements with your neighbors to get that oil. They're not going to fly oil out of Calgary, right? They're not flying it to Calgary. They still need pipelines. So then their pipelines are either to the north through Canada, to the east through Canada, through the west through Canada, or through the south through America, right? And so that's it. I know I'm smiling, and I know I'm kind of giggling here. I do not want to make light of how a great number of Canadians feel about being alienated. But as a realist, I don't understand what's the end goal. I don't quite get how we get from A to Z, because there are so many steps that I don't think they've actually thought about. They've thought A to F, but there's a whole 19 more letters.
Yeah, it's a second and third order impact problem that's something I talk about in a variety of places. That it's when you fail to think things through completely. I maybe the best example of this could be Brexit in the UK, because I think David Cameron, if I remember correctly, David Cameron was like, all right, they're asking for this referendum.
Sure.
I guess I got to put it forward. And when it passed, he immediately had to tender his resignation because this was not what he wanted, and they had to form a new government. And I wonder if some of the thinking on the part of the premier is similar to that, in that she thinks she can let them do everything they want to do to get to the point where the clear question is asked, but the odds of them voting for that in affirmative of that clear question are still kind of slim,
right?
And without a Nigel Farage type character to carry the banner for Albexit or whatever it's called, she's probably playing a political. She's doing the political calculus, and she's saying, you know what, it's not. I don't think we would lose this.
Right, and I it's a great opportunity for her to say to a portion of her base, hey, I gave you what you want. It didn't work. I will be a fighter for Alberta First stuff on a federal level. And, recently she's been able to organize a pipeline going to the west, right? So there is one pipeline going to the west already. She wants to build a second one. I'm not an expert on pipelines. I believe that they can just increase the capacity of the first one, which would solve some problems. But the big difference between Brexit and Alberta is Brexit was a country and it was a bunch of trade deals and doing all this stuff. Alberta is a province in a country with no ports. So, if it happens, good luck to them. I have family in Alberta. I love them. None of my family are into this at all. Like they think it's ridiculous. But, who knows? That's the thing about polling, right? Polling could be completely off.
That is true.
But I'd be surprised. Yeah. I'd be surprised if it happens. But if it does, expect a decades-long court battle. And
Speaking of polling and reading the tea leaves and the like, what's the general mood in Canada, the economy, international relations, Greenland, hatred of the U.S., etc.? What's the general mood north of the border?
Mood's fine. I wouldn't say mood's good. I'd say mood is fine. Regarding one of the unfortunate things is the relationship with the U.S., which has soured a little bit, and it's been able to provide many Canadians with speaking points. A reliable partner or a reliable friend is no longer a role. So predictability is a very important thing, especially when you're looking at economies and trade and all those things. So what's happened is it's been an incredible wake-up call for, I would say, the majority of Canadians that look to the U.S. for several things, including fun, including trade, and including going across the border to shop, right? All of a sudden, most Canadians are, well, I'd much rather support Canadians, so that's what they're doing. On a federal level, it's forced the government to look at different trade opportunities. Here's the thing. I think if Canada wished it could go back 14 months and everything was back to being the same, I think they would take that in a flash. But I don't think anything's ever going to be the same. Even if there's a new president or there's a new Congress, what it's done is it's made it realize that Canada needs to look at different trading partners, more like-minded trading partners. I think that might be a better way of saying it. For partnerships going forward, which is really sad. There are it's not going to make a lot of sense to trade little pieces of auto parts back and forth between us and Germany. That makes no sense. So there are certain industries that may die. But when all of a sudden, Fords are going to be, 60% more expensive in the U.S., then maybe things change. I don't know. One of the things that came out of Davos, which was nice, was it showed that Carney was kind of he spoke like a leader. And from that, now we're talking with a bunch of different similar-sized economies for trade relationships and trade opportunities. So whether that's, the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Belgium, Germany, the UK, other EU countries, it just, it provides a different opportunity opposed to just sending all our eggs in that American basket.
What was his line? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that seems sensible. You mentioned auto parts, and I saw a piece. I may have mentioned this in our last discussion, but I'll mention it again. I saw a piece on Sky News out of the UK, and they were trying to get to the bottom of how it all works. And it was, to me, it was bizarre as an American, because they were spending a good chunk of time in just north of Detroit in the US, where obviously, your Detroit auto industry is huge, but you've got certain parts that need to get imported, exported, etc. And they went across the border to Windsor, and the same issue, but the fact that it's less about the actual making of the automobile, right? Because if I told you go manufacture a car in Oakville or where they're manufactured in Ontario, in the assembly people put things together and the robots do their thing, etc. But then when you get to all of the other components and where they come from and how many times, I think the average component, the average part has crossed the border like 6 times before it actually gets to the assembly line, which then, and this, if the U.S. is either not involved at all or not as involved as they used to be, can you blame a prime minister for going over to China and saying, well, you used to make a lot of these parts and then they go through here and there and here. Why not just send them here because we need them and we want to avoid the tariffs? So I don't know if that's a question or a comment, but it's a complex situation, right? It's not as easy. It's not just as easy as saying, let's put a tariff on all the steel. Fine, all the steel tariff, okay. But then every other little component also has a tariff attached to it as well for crossing the border.
And I think
I can see the frustration.
I think that's one of the interesting points and key points here is that because of those situations, and there have been job losses in Canada, thousands of job losses, and we have a very, the auto industry in Ontario is incredibly important. That's why we need to look at different routes, and whether that is a Korean company or, God forbid, a Chinese company taking up those warehouses or plants in southwestern Ontario and start creating EVs that are Korean or Chinese in North America. Those opportunities are going to be looked at, right? So it's funny, and I know that you and I both watch podcasts, and we both read things and that sort of thing, and whether on your right or your left, I don't know, but on the left, it's very important. It's like, hey, because of these tariffs, what they've done is they've sent allies, and Canada's an ally, a brother or sister to America, into the arms of these other countries that you didn't want them to have relationships with. Don't get me started about China. China in the 2000s, in the 90s, were awful. I'm from Ottawa. They bugged our RCMP. They stole secrets. They are, at times, at worst, an horrible nation. That being said, they are getting better at a bunch of different things, and if it comes to increasing jobs in Canada, all of a sudden you kind of shrug your shoulders a little bit about what they're doing on a humanitarian station and say, yeah, but we kind of have to look after our own. So you don't quite run into the arms of someone who once did you wrong, but you reluctantly walk over and give them a handshake. And that is one of the key things, and maybe one of the things that the current administration didn't think was coming.
Let's shift.
Sure.
Away from.
We want to talk about music, movies.
I do actually want to talk about music. I want to do that in a second, though, because we were talking before this started, and you and I go back to 2019 when we met working for a company based in London, and we became fast friends.
Fast friends.
Yes, and one of the things that I always found interesting about you was your human catalog of music, and the fact that the human catalog of music kind of almost is in line with the sort of stuff that I listen to, which continues to evolve, but it's let's say alternative, indie, a little eclectic, etc., etc. But you have been writing about this, and during COVID, you started a newsletter, and then you moved it to Substack 18 months ago, I think we're talking about. And you've been religious about it, in that I don't know if you've missed a Friday with new music. Talk to me, I guess, about your creative process, because you're a writer, but you're writing about a topic.
Sure.
And how you go about finding songs, how you go about keeping your finger on the pulse of everything, and how long it takes you to put together the Friday deep dive, which is normally about, I don't know, 10 to 15 songs, I think.
Oh, it's usually a little bit more. But I've always loved music. My dad loved music, albums. And we were lucky, one of those houses that had shelves and shelves of albums. Just 2000. I took most of his albums when he downsized. He's still around, but so I've got, I don't know, 3,000 albums at home. But I've always loved music. I was the kid that sat and I had a little wooden radio, and I would sit there, and if I loved a song, I'd have a tape player and I would record it. I made lists. I loved lists. I had my own countdown. I was one of those kids. It was odd. Yeah, I had glasses and played Dungeons and Dragons. And then one day I got contacts and realized there was girls out there and everything was over. But that's not exactly true. I had a job. I was able to buy music. I listened to music. I was a DJ in college. I worked at a club as a DJ. I've always been into going to music. We see music all the time. But much like you, me, and not like you, me, like everybody, all of a sudden your music is here. It's usually your favorite stuff is when you were in your teen years and maybe into university, maybe into college. And then you get busy, right? You have a kid, you have a house, you have a job, you have a wife. You have all these things that all of a sudden take up all your time, and music isn't one of those. About 10 years ago, I'm over at my friend Eric's house. We're having one of those dinners. And I'm listening to music, and the families are playing in the background. And I'm in the kitchen with him, and I'm like, I don't know any of these songs. And he said to me, Oh yeah, I just put on Apple Music's new playlist. And I thought that was the greatest thing ever. Yeah, trust me, there's music I hated, there's music I liked. But all of a sudden it pushed me to all of a sudden look for new music. So there I was in my early 40s, all of a sudden going, okay, I'm going to listen to everything. And so I started listening to everything. And then I found a bunch of stuff. So I started then putting together a list, and then I started sharing it with friends. And then I think it was you that suggested, oh, you should put this on Substack. And then I had a little extra time, and I said, okay, well, let's put it on Substack. Now, like most marketers, most communicators, a good content calendar is a good content calendar. And so I would put together a content calendar. So every Friday I put out new music. For those Friday new musics, I don't spend a lot. I spend time, but the great thing about algorithms now, it just sends you stuff, whether you want it or not. So you're forced to listen to new stuff. There's a couple of websites I check for new music, and then my rule is if I like it, I share it. And I've expanded that to include a couple of different things. Like I have a goodbye section if someone died that week. I have a happy birthday, so we go back and revisit songs from the past, but mostly it's all about new music. Anywhere between 25 and 35 songs. Pull together a playlist, put it out there, and I think one of the things my friend Sanjay, who lives in Chicago, he's like, I like your thing, but you really should put together a playlist, make it easier for us. So I started doing that on Spotify, so people visit that as well, and that's great. Now, I also put out a column on Tuesday, and my column on Tuesday are basically arguments. It's arguments that you and I would have, it's arguments that you have with your kids, it's arguments that you have with friends about music. It's if the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is about to put out their list of who should be nominated, put out a list about who should be nominated, and then evaluate that. Or, I did one for David Bowie's. David Bowie died, the 10th anniversary of his death a month ago. My recent one yesterday it's so funny, it was written by a friend of mine who submitted and said, could you release this? And it was all about the Amen break, which is part of music lore because it's a sample that's been used thousands and thousands of times. And he thought this would be a good time to feature it. So I was like, oh yeah. So I turned into an editor, edited his stuff, and then put it out. But yeah, it's been, my wife has been very supportive. and I've been a writer for, my professional life. So I'm very lucky that I get to do this in my spare time.
I want to ask about, because you said that the algorithms are doing a good chunk of the heavy lifting, and Apple Music is obviously a plus, and Spotify is obviously changing people's lives, and so on. But I guess what intrigues me about where you are in all this is that we've kind of lost the process. I mean, what you I think are bringing back is the process of human curation, which used to be, I mean, as naive as we were as kids, we thought that the DJ was making all the decisions on the top 40 station. But, it really wasn't the case, and record companies get involved, and then there isn't payola, but, there is, and all of that. But absent listening to terrestrial radio or a channel like a Sirius XMU, which is my favorite on Sirius, absent the DJs on those places, it seems like the human curation of music is getting to the point where it's just outsourced to an algorithm, and that can't be good.
Well, I will take the counter argument and say that it works as well as you want it to work. So there are certain times, I wrote an article on hair metal. It came out last week. I listen to a lot of hair metal because in my articles I actually search up hair metal bands and I attached videos and that sort of thing. So my algorithm changes, right? So I got a lot of hair metal that I didn't know about. And so while it would be very easy for us to sit in a, and I think everyone's experienced this, where you sit into a silo and you continue, whether it's music or politics or you listen to the same sports show. All you have to do is watch 2 episodes of the Rich Eisen show, and next thing you know, you got Rich Eisen over and over and over and over again. So if you get stuck, yes. But there are so many different genres of music. So I will also use Google. My favorite music is not folk music, but my wife loves folk music, and I go to the Winnipeg Folk Festival. So I will search out folk music, which is counter to my algorithm. So my algorithm is very similar to yours. It's indie rock, indie pop, alternative, stuff like that. I'll also use Google. Every week I will search albums released today. It will give you, Genius will give you 45 albums that were released. Some names you will know, some names you won't. But all of a sudden you'll be like, what? Glass Tiger released an album? Like it's weird things like that it takes nothing to take an album and throw it into your Sonos. My way of looking at music is give every song 45 seconds. And after 45 seconds, it has you. Great. Listen to the next song. After 45 seconds, it doesn't have you. You have my permission to skip it. But art is art. What's art for me may not be art for you. Don't hate me for it. I'm not going to hate you for the art you love. One of the things that I loved about this is I grew up a metalhead. I loved metal music. I loved Ozzy and Iron Maiden growing up. And my friend Dutch, who helps me write my metal column, he loves metal. And so it's enabled me to actually look at new metal and hear things that used to be just noise to me. I'm like, oh my God, this is actually melodic. And I can't believe this, but I'm going to a metal show next month with him. And it's going to be what it is, right?
What are you going to see?
A band out of New England called Astronoid, which is like prog metal.
Okay.
I've got 3 shows coming up in the next month. I've got Astronoid. I've got my favorite Australian band.
Which is the Bel Air Lip Bombs?
Which is High School.
High School, sorry.
High School. And a week after High School is my second favorite Australian band, which is the Bel Air Lip Bombs. And they're both playing at really small venues here in Toronto. So I'm very excited about that. And Chapter House announced a tour yesterday. So I'm not sure if you remember Chapter House from 1991.
Not totally.
Mesmerized? Oh my goodness. I'm sure they're playing Chicago. I still remember a show I saw them in 1993 with the Wonder Stuff, which was amazing. So they were a band that only released 2 albums. So then it's also great, right? All these bands are coming back together, even though they were a blip of time. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, there might be music if I've retired from my job as an accountant. Let's go back on tour, right?
I sent you a note. I think it was yesterday, because a song came on Sirius XMU, and I had asked if it had crossed your radar. Of course, it had crossed your radar before. But are you familiar with the story behind the artist Korea Girl?
I would have written about this a couple of months ago. I don't remember.
Yes. And now it's getting airplay on XMU, and I was telling my daughter the other day, the first time I heard the song, I'm like, wow, this sounds like a 90s throwback. It's kind of got maybe a little bit of like a Sundays meets Len feel to it, but it definitely is 1994 or somewhere in there. And I thought it was, hey, this is a catchy tune. And then they played it again maybe a week later, and they said, well, Korea Girl is actually a person who is working in HR in California somewhere, but recorded this song in the mid-90s, and somebody rediscovered it, and now it's big. But the point behind that is, I guess, back to the kind of human curation versus algorithm there's still room for weird stories like that, and it's kind of a fun thing that happened.
Yeah, it's funny because Radiohead had a song hit the chart 28 years after it was released, right? With Let Down, and it had everything to do with the Bear finale, and it had everything to do with, that it gets caught on TikTok, and someone watches a 7 or 17-second video, and that song hits them. And it could just, I'm still snippet of that song, and they're like, oh my God. And then that's where I think the human curation comes out, right? It's all of a sudden you're hearing something for the first time, even though it may have been out for a generation. And I think that's the great thing about music, right? I talk to friends all the time. One of the great arguments we have is, in 100 years, what bands are people going to listen to? My argument is the two bands people are going to listen to in 100 years are the Beatles and Nirvana. And it's not so much the Beatles just because if you don't like the Beatles, I feel sorry for you. But it's such a crazy wide spectrum of what they did, and the fact that, yes, maybe at the beginning they stole from different genres of music and turned it into whatever, but by the end it was their own and everyone was just following them. And what Nirvana did with Nevermind is not, it wasn't just generational. It's ridiculous. And if you have 14 or 12-year-old kids right now, they'll be like, yep, that song, that album talks to me. And it's funny. It's like how everyone used to go through their Zeppelin phase. I think everyone will go through a Nirvana phase. And remember, like, Nevermind was a number one album. It knocked Michael Jackson out of the number one spot in 92, January 92. Smells Like Teen Spirit was a top 10 song. How is Smells Like Teen Spirit a top 10 song? But what is in those songs speaks to teenagers and will continue to speak to those teenagers going forward, in my mind. There's also bands like The Police, like everyone's going to love Every Breath You Take, and for God forbid, Don't Stop Believing is never going to end. But while Don't Stop Believing is a great song, don't get me wrong, I love Don't Stop Believing. It's not a movement song like the Nevermind album. And I'm not even really a Nirvana fan, but that's just...
So why did Don't Stop Believing, why? I mean, why did it enter the cultural zeitgeist and not leave?
So I'm old. So I remember when Escape came out, and Journey were in 81. Journey were one of the biggest bands in the world. Rolling Stones and Journey. Zeppelin had broken up. Van Halen were in a bit of a low. Escape came out, massive album, sold millions and millions of copies. And Don't Stop Believing wasn't even the biggest hit off that album. I think that was Open Arms. But the song just spoke to people. Then it went away because it was cheesy. And then cheesy became good again because it got brought back by Glee about 15 years ago. It was in the very first episode of Glee. And all of a sudden you had a new generation of people saying, oh, this song is great. Even though the song is about basically nothing. It's more or less American Pie for different, Don McLean would go to his deathbed and not say what that song is about, and everyone can interpret it differently. And that's the greatest thing about art, right? If you ever go up beside somebody in an art gallery and you're looking at the same painting and you talk to them about what they see, there's a great chance it is not what you see, right? And I think that's one of the great things about music, right? Something talks to you because it talks to you. It doesn't mean that it's going to mean anything to, like, you and I, while we have so many similarities when it comes to music, there are certain songs you send me and I'm like, eh. And I'm sure there's certain songs on my weekly list you're like, what the heck is this?
Yeah,
right?
I guess that's one of the things I enjoy about the newsletter. Actually, is it comes at the right time. I get it, and then we'll start looking at the tail end of Friday. Maybe I'm winding down with a cocktail or something like that. And I do sort of do the 45-second test. In some cases, I will skip to listen to the first couple of bars and then skip toward the middle and see what are they, is there some sort of time shift or weird break or something like that. But the point here, I guess, is that there's still I keep coming back to curation, but I think it's a lost art of managing through the algorithms in a way that can touch on certain things. This is a roundabout way of saying it. You do a great job with the newsletter, and yeah. I know that when I see it, I know that it's probably going to be about 75% songs that I don't care to listen to again, sure. and maybe I won't ever listen to them again because they won't take off for one reason or another.
It's you and I talked about this before. It's about being curious. It's about being curious and being able to step outside what is your typical situation. And just in this case, opposed to, hey, I don't want to eat that. It's like, I don't want to listen to that. Well, maybe you should eat that. Maybe you shouldn't listen to that. Right? And here's the thing. It's not about, oh, that's bad. It's about, oh, that's not for me. And I think we should, as a group, say, you know what? That's just not for me. But go for it. Have fun. Like there are certain things that I hate mayonnaise. Like I detest mayonnaise. And people put mayonnaise on everything. And it disgusts me. It disgusts me, and I can't get over the fact that how disgusting I am. But I'm from the generation where Marlo Thomas, free to be you and me. So, honestly, if you like putting mayonnaise on stuff, have at it. Enjoy. Just, I won't help. I'm good. I don't need any mayonnaise.
What's a mayonnaise band for you? You can understand why they're successful. You understand why people like it. But for the love of what all that is good and holy, you're not going to listen to them.
Oh my goodness, there are so many. I'll keep it in Canadian music. I don't get Drake. The mumble rap, it's not for me. I listen to a lot of Drake. There are certain songs that I don't mind. But it's the funniest thing, even when there's a song he puts out that I'm like, oh, I don't mind that song. By the fifth time I hear it, I'm like, oh, God, I've heard it enough. But he's super popular and people love him. So have at it, right? The funny thing about Biebs is, like, songs I originally hated, all of a sudden I appreciate significantly more.
You're talking about Justin Bieber.
Yeah. So something like Sorry, I'll be like, oh my goodness, that song... Maybe it's because I didn't indulge myself so much when it came out. But the biggest, keeping with Canada, the biggest one is Tragically Hip. I'm Gen X.
Yeah.
I went to college in the 90s.
Yep.
I'm white and I'm male.
Yep.
Me and about 3 of my friends are the only people that fit that demographic that don't like the Tragically Hip. Now, there are 2 or 3 songs that I'm like, that's a pretty good song. But for the majority of the songs, I listen to them and I think that they're garbage. Not that I don't like them, but I actually don't understand why people like them. It's like mayonnaise. Like
maybe Miracle Whip, which is even more ersatz and despised.
So yes.
So Miracle Whip is despised. Miracle Whip is actually despised by a lot of mayonnaise lovers, and I hate mayonnaise as well.
Do you hate Miracle Whip?
I hate Miracle the whole family, But the point, I guess, is that Miracle Whip, to a lot of the Hellmann's and Duke's diehards, Miracle Whip is not mayonnaise. It's a sandwich spread, and never the twain shall meet.
So what is your spread then?
So we're not talking music now. We're talking sandwiches.
We're
Yeah.
pivoting. What is your spread?
I'm a big spicy mustard guy.
Spicy mustard guy.
I like Dijon as well. Underrated burger condiment to me is Dijon mustard. I like the spicy brown mustard. But I mean, I grew up hating mayonnaise. There are occasions when it gets sneaked into something and I end up being like, oh, okay, this is tolerable. I have tried the mayonnaise instead of butter on the grilled cheese, which is supposed to give you a different crust. I could not taste the mayonnaise when I did that, but it's also not like something that I would be a go-to if I were a grilled cheese maker. But I'm a mustard guy.
So if you had a club sandwich, what would be on your club sandwich?
That's interesting because as I like to, we've got a kid away at school, and I tell him about my eating exploits back in the day. But we had a meal card freshman year at Syracuse. You get your 19 meals a week or 16 or whatever it was, and then you also had a preloaded meal card with another $60, $100 or whatever that came out of. And I spent my entire meal card on club sandwiches at the Sadler Hall Deli, which became almost a nightly ritual until I ran out of money and had to wait to the next semester, or had to use part of my work study paycheck. But on a club sandwich, it's just mustard, no mayo, and that's fine as long as there's some sort of cheese. But there was a time when I thought mustard wasn't like evil, but I was like, this is not my favorite thing. And you'll laugh at this, but back in the Hoosier Land where I grew up, we had a chain that I think there's one restaurant still in existence from this chain, whether it's sort of like Rack's restaurants, which I'm sure you're familiar with, or they went away, but there's a couple of them. This chain was called Hot and Now. Their thing, the burgers were like, I want to say they were 39 cents. So this is 89, 90. This is 90 because I was interning at the TV station and would go over to Hot and Now. But the reason the burger place called Hot and Now was able to sell them Hot and Now. You remember how McDonald's used to be, you order a quarter pounder and it's ready for you. And then they went to grill to order and it upset the natural order of things. Hot and Now, you had one choice for your burger. It was a cheeseburger. I guess you could get the cheese optional, but it had to have ketchup, mustard, and pickles, and that was it. So you go to the drive-thru and you're like, I would like 4 burgers because they're 39 cents each. Great, yeah, you can get the burgers. Can I have them without mustard? No, we can't do that because it would slow the process down. And Hot and Now obviously was not a long-term success with that strategy, but I think that was my first introduction to mustard as a condiment, because I was like, I didn't like mayo and thought mustard was probably pretty similar. So very long-winded answer to your question of what it is that I put on a club sandwich.
I go dry.
Completely dry.
On a club sandwich.
Okay. Have you done I would imagine that there's probably like a good Jewish deli somewhere near-ish you that you frequent.
Of course. Yeah.
And
several.
what do you get there, and what's what's on this? What do you put on the sandwich after you get the sandwich?
I much prefer Italian. Toronto's a very big Italian place, so I prefer an Italian cold cut sandwich. So one of the great things I love about Stephen Colbert is this Colbert questionnaire, the Colbert questionnaire, and I love the question, "What's the best sandwich?" And honestly, the best sandwich, it depends on the time of day.
Okay.
Because, well, right now we're recording this, it's 11:15 for me, but it's 10:15 for you. So the best sandwich, if I was asking you, for me, the best sandwich would be a bacon, egg, and cheese. Breakfast, standard bacon, egg, and cheese. At 11:15, so for me right now, the best sandwich for me would be a muffaletta.
Okay.
I love a muffaletta. I like that spicy kind of jargonera. I like the salamis. I like the cheese. I like the olive loaf. I think that's amazing. And then after 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the best sandwich is a smash burger. My preferred smash burger is a Oklahoma burger. Pickles, mustard, cheese if you want to put cheese on it. And then, of course, after 9 o'clock at night, it's an ice cream sandwich, of course. Ice cream sandwich is the best sandwich. It all depends on the time of the day.
But do you go to the Jewish delis at all?
I've been to Jewish delis. It's not my favorite. My wife loves a Reuben. I'll do smoked meat. If I do smoked meat, actually, I'd like smoked meat. Smoked meat, spicy mustard, simple, easy, simple. Some sort of carbonated beverage to cut the stuff. Hopefully not sweet like a club soda or something with lime. Plain potato chips. Perfect. That's a perfect lunch.
And for the uninitiated, I like where this conversation is now going. For the uninitiated, smoked meat is not pastrami, but it's in the same family.
It's in the same family. It's pastrami has a certain amount of spice in it that's used in the curing process. And I will eat pastrami. I grew up with pastrami. That's the great thing about my mom was Eastern European, so a lot of delied meat, pierogies, borscht, those sort of cabbage rolls, cabbage soup, that sort of thing. And so make your own pickles, all those things. So we did all of that growing up. So
as I guess we're just north of an hour. So what would you, let's do the job interview sort of thing. Do you have any questions for me?
Do you want to keep it light or do you want to go heavy?
We're in a weird time as a society, so I'm okay actually with the heavier sort of questions.
I was curious from you. You and I are both late night guys. We love late night television. Earlier this week, Stephen Colbert was asked not to release something on the air that he recorded. How does that make you feel?
My understanding of the situation is that Colbert and this candidate, Tallarico, both decided to make something out of a decision that they made or Colbert made not to interview the other candidate because they're trying to make fetch happen with this Tallarico character. So the way I've seen it explained is Tallarico is in a primary against Jasmine Crockett, and the winner will take on Senator John Cornyn. I haven't been to Texas since I worked there in 2018, but I will posit a guess that the rank and file Republican is not going to support Cornyn. Again, I haven't studied it. If I understand correctly, Cornyn is in a primary fight with another candidate. So the way I see this, the way I've seen this explained is that Tallarico is supposedly the guy by way of the fact that he's LARPing as a religious person in order to get the independent vote so that he would appear more conservative and has a better chance of upending the GOP's candidate. So the question was posed. Again, this is my understanding of the situation from what I've studied the last couple days, but I also tried to tune it out after a certain point. The way it's been presented to me is that Colbert was told, go ahead, interview Tallarico, but if you put it on the air, you have to give equal time to his primary challenger. And since he didn't want to do that, Colbert and Tallarico saw an opportunity to put it entirely online. Therefore, it's not over the airwaves and it's not subject to an equal time thing. And they were also able to play the victim in this, which was not. I don't watch Colbert, and it has not been my thing. I actually think he did a much better job pretending to be a caricature of conservative commentators on his report or rapport. I thought he did a much better job at that. And I guess the financial decision, the ratings decision, or whatever was made by CBS that the show is just going to get ended. So I think part of this is Colbert is in IDGAF mode and figures, I've only got a few months left anyway, so why not just go out as a champion of left-leaning causes.
So from what I'm hearing, you don't believe the FCC or the people at CBS were involved in this was a strict Stephen Colbert ruse?
If they were involved, it was just to advise them that you can't put this on the air unless you reach out to his opponent and offer her equal time. So it was not this was not the FCC bearing down and saying we're going to sue you. I don't think there was any pressure put from the Trump administration. I think it was just simply, we need to placate our bosses, and we also can't run the risk of an FCC fine. So they made a mountain out of something that was not mountainous, and they were able to do that for. So I talk a lot about, and I do this in personal conversations, and I do it a little bit online. I talk a lot about the concept of being directionally correct, and how that is really, a lot of times, that's all that you need. And so what Colbert and Tallarico are able to do in this particular situation is to say, FCC didn't like this, so we had to just put it on YouTube. And that's directionally correct, because the FCC has all sorts of rules around equal time, and obviously CBS, the news division, more so, has been in trouble over things and sued by the administration, and so on and so forth. So it is directionally correct for Colbert and Tallarico to say, oh, the FCC meddling in our affairs. And it's directionally correct for them to say we couldn't air this, and we're. But the reality here is that they saw an opportunity to make something out of nothing, and they ran with it. And will it benefit Talarico? I don't know. I can't read the tea leaves when it comes to Texas elections anymore. I can tell you what I witnessed in 2018. So maybe this is a good segue. Because in 2018, I was commuting from Chicago to Dallas every week, fly down on Monday morning, fly back Friday night. I was working in Dallas. I was working in a very liberal part of Dallas. So Denton is north and a little west of Dallas proper. It's maybe due north-ish of Fort Worth. The old line has always been that Fort Worth is much more conservative. Dallas County always goes liberal. You look at the way it votes. It has voted for a long time. And Denton is a college town. University of North Texas is there, so of course Denton is going to be even more liberal by design. So when I was there in 2018, it was Ted Cruz versus Beto, and I could tell you that it was going to be closer than most people thought. Ted Cruz ended up winning. The margin surprised a lot of people, but I could tell you that it was going to be closer because Beto had energized that part of Dallas so much that it wasn't until October. And so I'd fly in and I'd stay in some Airbnb somewhere in and around Denton, or 15, 20 minutes away, like Flower Mound or somewhere like that. It was until the middle of October that I saw my first Ted Cruz sign. Before that, Beto signs were everywhere. So I think you mentioned very early on about polling, and sometimes pollsters are wrong, and that was one of the situations where they were dead wrong. Where I'm going with this is the kind of candidate, Talarico, this is the kind of candidate that if you are on the right, you are going to misread him at your peril. And Ted Cruz still won, but I think he misread Beto at his peril. And the reason that there's so much support behind Talarico, I think, is that he is considered somebody that could out Beto because he's kind of pushing all of the right center left buttons that could give you a chance to win on a statewide scale. Frankly, Jasmine Crockett does not do that. So I understand how the Democrats in Texas are thinking through this. I understand where they're going with this, and that this is just part of the machinery, I think, trying to work for a candidate that they think can win in the general.
It'll be interesting to see. I have no idea what's going to happen. I can talk one last thing about Canada. I can say that at this stage, I don't believe there will be an election in Canada unless the federal government falls itself and goes for a majority, which it very well may do.
And that's something that was tried by Trudeau with his last snap election, right? He saw a possibility to have a minority,
and people were still. That was right at the 2011. 2021. Right at the height of anti-COVID regulations. He didn't anticipate that very well, which he actually lost a couple of seats. He needed a couple of seats going forward. The interesting thing in talking about polling and you and I talking about how it doesn't really matter, and right now the Liberals and the Conservatives in Canada are very close, 4 or 5 points difference, both in the mid to high 30s. I think the last one I saw was Conservatives around 35 and Liberals around 39, give or take. The biggest difference is the two leaders, where Carney has approval rating of being the Prime Minister of choice in the low 50s. So far exceeding what his party is doing. And unfortunately for Pierre Poilievre, I've seen anywhere between the mid 20s to the low 30s. So he doesn't quite have the, if you will, the statesman feel that Carney has, and which is, it's weird, because I feel like, unfortunately for Pierre Poilievre, he's been spinning his wheels and trying to find traction that is not there, and if he came out with policies and things that people could hold on to, that would be great, but unfortunately it hasn't happened for him yet.
I think that the next election has to be held no later than 28?
29.
29. The interesting thing about Carney to this American observer is that whether or not he says things that are in line with, I mean, I haven't paid, other than his trip to China, I don't think I've paid too much attention, but I can tell you this from the casual observer standpoint, he seems like somebody who's in charge.
Very much.
And that I think part of it is because of the banking, treasury, exchequer type background that he has, that right now has to be a good thing.
Yes.
For him, and a really bad thing for the opposition, because the opposition had their chance and kind of bungled it.
The thing about Carney is reminiscent of older conservatives. So for people who still remember the 80s and 90s and Brian Mulroney and Joe Clark and people like that, that's kind of what Carney is, with some social policies, right? So he hasn't gone as far right as the former Reform Party and the present Conservative Party have gone. He's more of a progressive conservative, which is people still remember with wonderful glaze in their eyes about the wonder years of the 80s, right? With having some social stuff. It's my last, so that's kind of my Carney thing. I don't see him losing anytime soon, just because you know what he is and you stand for him. I talked a little bit about Pierre Poilievre. I don't want to bash on him too much, but I wish he would have a little more substance. He just recently had a leadership review in Calgary. There's rumors that it was hand-picked people who voted, and he got an overwhelming approval rating of 87%, which is great. That means that 87% of his party think he should be the leader. But when you hand-pick people that attend that, that's a drawback of that. Also, they had people at that convention that have speaking roles that are separatists. So if you're sending a message, I want to lead Canada, but yet you're giving time to people who don't want to be part of Canada, that sends a different message. Now, the thing that happened last week was, it's the problem is Pierre just can't catch a break. So last week, one of his higher end MPs, who happens to be a college friend of J.D. Vance, went down to America. And very publicly, I'm going to meet with Americans in Washington. I'm going to solve this trade dispute myself. It was found out that, yes, he did meet with some administration, but there was no one important. And that would be commendable. You're doing what you can. And this person, Jamil Javani, he is riding his Oshawa, which has seen job losses because of the auto industry. I can commend that. Good job. You're doing right for your constituents. But then, for some reason, he goes on Breitbart News, and we get the soundbite, whether he meant it or not, that said Canadians have to stop all this anti-American hissy fit that they're going through. Which I don't understand, considering his riding lost 1,200 jobs, and him saying to appease American listeners, yeah, it's us, we need to suck it up. It doesn't make any sense. Which brings me back to Poilievre, because yesterday Poilievre was asked, of course, the question, came back and said, he speaks for himself, he doesn't speak for the party. At that instance, Pierre, what we actually need is a scolding. You need to come down with the hammer and show that you're actually in charge of this party. You need to chastise this guy and throw him out of caucus. Do something to him. Don't just say, oh, he doesn't speak for the party, he speaks for himself. If you have members of your party going out and calling Canadians whiners, what's the incentive for a centrist like me to actually ever put a vote to you? There's none. And that's my problem with Poilievre. It was slogans, and now it's, I gotta be honest, I'm not sure he has the stones to actually have to do the job, which is the hand that we're dealt with.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think of him, I think of the Apple interview, which
great
is
moment.
Yeah, the great moment for him. But he kind of appears, he doesn't appear statesmanlike.
Yeah.
And that's what, so on this side of the border, the discussion, you had the Munich Security Conference that took place last week, which is kind of the introduction of the primary cycle, although it's not really the primary cycle. But you get Gavin Newsom was there, and AOC was there, and the feedback that they're getting to the I haven't seen actually a lot of the feedback on Newsom's appearance, mostly because I believe Newsom he's always going to be Newsom. I mean, you're pretty convinced of what he is about, what he's going to say, and whether or not there's going to be substance there. You know, this kind of a track record of him running California and then saying we're the fifth largest economy in the world if we were on our own, blah blah blah, all that sort of fun stuff. But and I'll bring this back to Poilievre in a second. The AOC quotes about Taiwan, which was a bunch of word salad, kind of left her supporters looking at her like, okay, wait a minute. And so she's had to backtrack on if it's the introduction of a presidential candidacy, it was not a good introduction of a presidential candidacy. She did not appear to be well vetted, and now she's had to backtrack and say, well, no, I wasn't over there to run for president. I'm over there because I'm fighting against Viktor Orban and Trump and all the other right-wing leaders throughout the world. And the lack of substance is what has stuck out. And I mean, if she chooses to run for president, good for her. I think she would actually be she could possibly be a formidable candidate. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I am saying that. But the point I'm trying to make is there's that gravitas factor And maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what we're in effect talking about. Carney has the gravitas of a prime minister. Carney looks like a statesman, and Poilievre does not, and AOC does not, but Gavin Newsom does, and it's that it factor, the Gertrude Stein remark about Oakland, that there's no there, and it's kind of what you have to look at with these people. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe Poilievre's focus grouped too much.
Yeah.
And Carney, okay, probably focus grouped, but whatever he's done while in office has sort of backed up the fact that he has that executive presence that you want in your country's chief executive.
Well, yeah, it's also the smarts, right? It's
yeah.
Certain people look like they're smart, and I think rightly or wrongly when it comes to Poilievre, it's not that he doesn't look smart, and he's done a great job. The fact that he's had a career in politics so long, that's commendable. But what I want out of him is substance, right? It's so funny. You bring up Newsom, and it's a funny thing about Newsom. What Newsom has going for him is he's all statesman, right? Regardless what comes out of his mouth, right? He's all statesman. He is what you want in a leader. White, male, tall. That guy you're getting behind. That's kind of what, and that's maybe what goes for him in a beneficial way if he runs in 2028. Because you look at him, you look at probably J.D. Vance, and you're like, who looks more like a president? Visually, without substance, visually. And when you look at Carney and you look at Poilievre, unfortunately, that great moment with the apple, if that's his great moment, where's the beef, right?
He peaked in high school.
Yeah, where's the beef? Like that's where that is, and it's a little too. It's funny you bring up high school. You could see Poilievre in 20 years sitting around a bar in downtown Ottawa, talking about what could have or should have been. Because honestly, what could have, should have been, and his inability to pivot, or that party's inability to pivot and also read the tea leaves, left a bunch of people who have formerly voted Conservative, and more importantly, a bunch of people who formerly voted NDP, saying, "Oh, we don't want this guy anywhere near the head chair, because A, he doesn't know what to do, but more importantly, he just seems like a lackey." And the last thing we need is a lackey when we have a Chester, right? It's back and forth. Donald Trump is Spike, from those Looney Tune commercials, walking down like that, and Poilievre is like a Chester. That's like, hey Spike, hey Spike, hey Spike, hey Spike, hey Spike, and that's unfortunately what he looks like, and not what he looks like. That's how he has been. That's how I see him.
I had not heard. I wasn't sure where you were going with that. I'm glad that you mentioned the reference, because now I, as a fellow Gen Xer, totally get it. That's a pretty spot on analysis. I had not thought of Spike and Chester
in a long time. Right?
In a long time. There's also Sam and Ralph. Those are my other two niche.
Maybe that should be our next topic. So here's what we do. You and I have a debate. We go back and forth. We can take this offline. We go back and forth. Which of the famous Looney Tunes duos, which band is which character? Who's Spike? Who's Spike? Who's Chester? Who's Sylvester? Who's Tweety Bird? There we go.
Sam and Ralph.
Ralph.
Yeah. That's a good one for the next time. Final thoughts then. What have I not asked you? I'm stealing again from trigonometry guys, but I love those guys. What haven't I asked you that I should have asked you about?
We didn't talk a little bit about tourism, which is too bad. As you know, I've said I love America. You and I had lunch in July. I don't see that changing anytime soon. Rhetoric has to change.
Well, will it change enough for you to, when you go to the folk music festival this coming July, will it change enough for you to completely avoid the USA on your way through?
I didn't like the questions I was asked last time I came through. I didn't like that the border security guy...
Oh, you mean at the border, not the questions when we sat down for lunch.
No. I didn't like the way the border security guy kind of tried to insult me. Like, to be honest, like, and once again, I love America. Your interstate system is amazing. The fact that up here our unsweetened iced tea is just sweetened with NutraSweet, which is awful. When you say no sugar, I want no sugar. I want unsweetened iced tea. National park system. I love New York City. Frick, I like Chicago. I love California. I love North Carolina. As I've told you, I've been to 47 states.
That's actually, I have not been to 47 states. That's impressive.
And I've enjoyed time in every single one of them.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Canada's not broken, but it needs we need to keep working on putting that addition on the house. That's what we need to do here. That's the analogy I'll do there. We hope that the fence that our neighbor has put up is a one that can be opened every now and then, and we can still share barbecue and corn dogs over and across the fence.
Yeah.
Right.
You need a cup of sugar. It's nice to know where you can go for the cup of sugar.
We will revert back to being Wilson, and you can be, like, was it Tim Allen's family? I forgot who they were. With their names.
Toolman Taylor, right?
Taylor, the Taylors, right?
Yeah.
You can be the Taylors, we'll be Wilson. Go forward. There it is. And I'm very excited about the brand new Avengers movie coming out in December. Yay, Avengers. They'll make everything right.
That, yeah, I've so tuned out of superhero movies.
Devil Wears Prada 2. There's movies for everybody, David.
There's a movie for everybody.
There's Odyssey.
Yeah.
Right? No, you're not looking impressed at all. What about Masters of the Universe?
Okay. Yeah. Is that He-Man?
Yeah, it's coming out.
They're making a He-Man movie
in June.
Wow.
Jared Leto plays Skeletor.
And this is probably the way to close it. But I will send a my buddy Huff is follow each other on X. Known him for quite a while. He's been using AI to his benefit in creating things, and he used Grok Imagine to create a trailer for what was supposed to be a campy 80s era Lord of the Rings-ish type, He-Man-ish type thing called Sword Bow.
Like it.
Yes, and he's up to 3 million views so far.
You got to send that to me. Or
can
I just search it? Sword Bow?
Of Sword Bow. You might be able to search it. It might be able to pop up. But he's that's the kind of movie that I would see. It looks like it's completely AI generated, and we may be a couple years away from AI generation of entire movies. But from a proof of concept standpoint, though, it's really interesting because you can just say, make a trailer about this, that, and the other thing, and then what's the Hollywood studio going to do? It's really Really fascinating. Probably a good place to close because it's at some point you will come in contact with Swordbow and then ask questions about what's actually
what the
going
Swordbow?
on. Yeah.
Well, thank you, David. This has been lovely.
Thank you, Stephen. It's been a pleasure. Thanks again for hopping on, and we will do this another time for sure.